Hey everyone! Welcome back to the Chill English channel, the place where you can relax, listen, and grow your English naturally. I'm Sophia.
And I'm Jake. Today's topic is something very common in everyday life, but also something that carries a lot more meaning than we usually admit.
Yes, we're talking about money, but not just in the usual way. We're going to explore how money actually shapes the way we think, feel, and even see ourselves.
Because money is one of those things that looks simple on the outside, but becomes very complex once you start thinking about its role in your life.
Exactly. At first, money feels like just a practical tool that helps us manage daily life, but slowly it becomes something emotional without us even noticing.
It connects to comfort, security, freedom, and sometimes even to our sense of identity, which is where things start getting a little complicated.
And the interesting part is that most people don't stop and question this relationship. They just live with it, even when it creates pressure.
That's true. People often say that money is important, but they don't always realize how deeply it influences their thoughts and feelings.
Sometimes money becomes a quiet voice in the background, shaping how we judge our progress and compare ourselves to others.
And that voice doesn't always speak loudly. It often shows up in small thoughts that feel harmless at first.
Like when you see someone doing well financially and suddenly wonder if you are doing enough with your life.
Or when you look at your own situation and feel like something is missing, even if everything is actually stable.
Yes, and those feelings don't always come from reality. They often come from the meaning we attach to money.
Let me ask you something, Sophia. Have you ever noticed how quickly money can change your mood, even if nothing else in your life has changed?
Yes, definitely. Sometimes just checking your account can suddenly make you feel either calm or slightly stressed.
Exactly. It's interesting how a number on a screen can influence your emotions so strongly.
And that shows us something important. Money is not just about what we have, but about how we interpret it.
Two people can have the same amount of money, but one feels secure while the other feels anxious, which means the difference is not the money itself.
It's the story behind it, the expectations, the comparisons, and the meaning they give to that number. I think this relationship with money often starts very early, even before we fully understand what money is.
Yes, we learn from our environment, from our families, and from society without realizing it.
We observe how people react to money, how they talk about it, and how they judge others based on it.
And slowly, we build our own beliefs, even if no one clearly explains them to us.
For example, some people grow up thinking money means safety, while others grow up associating it with stress or pressure.
And those early ideas stay with us, shaping how we feel about money as adults. At the beginning, money is simply a tool that helps us survive and manage basic needs.
Yes, it helps us buy food, pay rent, and take care of everyday responsibilities, which makes it very practical and necessary.
But over time, something shifts in a very subtle way.
Money stops being just a tool and starts becoming a measure of life.
It becomes something we use to compare progress, achievements, and even personal worth.
And that shift is so quiet that most people don't even notice when it happens.
One day, you're simply focused on your daily life, and suddenly you find yourself asking deeper questions.
Questions like whether you're moving fast enough or whether your life looks successful from the outside.
You start wondering if you're behind compared to others, even if you never thought about it before.
And those questions don't always come from your own goals. They often come from what you see around you. Comparison plays a big role here, especially in today's world where everything is visible all the time.
Yes, we're constantly exposed to other people's lives, especially through social media.
You see people traveling, buying things, starting businesses, and living what looks like a perfect life.
And even if you know that what you see is only part of the story, it still affects how you feel.
Because your brain doesn't always separate reality from presentation.
It just sees patterns and starts making comparisons automatically. And the strange thing is that comparison doesn't need logic to work, it only needs visibility.
Exactly. It doesn't ask whether something is true or complete, it just reacts to what it sees.
So even if your life is stable and meaningful, it can still feel less impressive when you compare it to something polished and curated.
That's why many people feel pressure without fully understanding where it comes from.
Also, I have a question that might sound a bit random.
Go ahead.
Why does everyone online look like they have their life completely figured out?
Because no one posts their confusion or uncertainty in the same way.
That makes sense. People share results, not the messy process behind them.
Exactly. And when you only see results, it creates an unrealistic standard. This constant exposure can slowly change how we see ourselves.
Yes, it affects our confidence in subtle ways.
Even if we are doing well, we might still feel like we are not doing enough.
Because the standard we compare ourselves to is not always real or complete.
This is where money becomes connected to something deeper, something more personal.
You mean self-worth?
Yes, some people begin to connect their value as a person to how much they earn.
So their confidence rises when their income rises and falls when it doesn't.
And that creates a very fragile sense of self.
Because now your value depends on something that can change at any time.
It's like your identity becomes tied to numbers instead of who you really are.
And numbers are not stable in the long term.
Exactly. They go up and down, but your sense of worth should not depend on that.
I think many people are not just worried about money itself, but about what it represents in their lives.
Yes, money represents security, stability, and the ability to make choices.
It can also represent independence and control over your future.
But at the same time, it can represent fear, pressure, and uncertainty.
And that mix of meanings makes the relationship with money very emotional.
Have you ever noticed how money-related thoughts can stay in your mind even when you are not actively thinking about them?
Yes, they often sit quietly in the background and influence your mood without you realizing it.
Even when you are trying to relax, those thoughts can still be present.
That's what makes money stress different. It is not always loud, but it is very persistent. So when we ask whether money is good or bad, the answer is not very simple.
Yes, because money itself is neutral. It's just a tool that we use in our daily lives.
What really matters is how we use it and what meaning we attach to it.
Because that meaning shapes our experience much more than the money itself. In the end, money is something we interact with every day, but its role is not always clear.
And that is why it's important to understand not just how much money we have, but how it influences our thinking.
Because once we become aware of that influence, we can start changing the way we relate to it.
And that awareness can make a big difference in how we experience both money and life. You know, Sophia, I've been thinking about something. It feels like society has a very clear idea of what money means, even if no one ever explains it directly.
Yes, I agree. It's like an unspoken rule that everyone somehow understands without needing to hear it clearly.
And that rule often says that more money means more success.
Exactly. And not just success. It also suggests respect, intelligence, and even importance.
Which is interesting because money was never designed to measure those things.
No, but it became a shortcut. People like simple ways to understand complex ideas, and money is very easy to see and compare.
That's true. It's much easier to compare salaries than to compare happiness or meaning.
Or emotional strength, or kindness, or personal growth, which are all much harder to measure.
So society chooses the easiest measure, even if it's not the most accurate one.
Yes, and once that idea becomes common, people start accepting it without questioning it.
And then it spreads everywhere, in conversations, in media, in expectations.
Even in the way people talk about others, like saying someone is, quote, doing well, just because they earn more.
While ignoring everything else about their life.
Exactly. It becomes a very narrow definition of success.
I think that's where the problem starts. When success is reduced to something so simple, it loses its real meaning.
Yes, because real success is much more complex and personal.
But complexity is uncomfortable, so people prefer simple answers.
And money becomes that simple answer.
Another interesting thing is how money is often connected to intelligence. Yes, that's a very common assumption.
People sometimes believe that if someone is wealthy, they must also be smart.
even if there is no clear connection between those two things.
Exactly. Earning money in one area does not mean you understand everything about life.
But the perception is very strong. I've noticed that when a wealthy person speaks, people often listen more carefully.
Yes, their words seem more important, even if the message is very simple.
It's like money adds weight to their voice.
That's a good way to describe it.
Even basic advice can sound like deep wisdom when it comes from someone successful.
Yes, like wake up early and work hard.
And suddenly everyone's impressed.
Exactly. I think this happens because of something called perception.
Meaning the way we see and interpret things.
Yes, and perception is not always accurate.
It is influenced by what we believe and what we expect.
So if we expect wealthy people to be intelligent, we will see them that way.
Even when there is no real evidence. And over time, these ideas become stronger,
Yes, they become part of how we understand the world,
which makes them harder to question.
because they feel normal.
But when we stop and think about it, we can see that intelligence comes in many different forms. Yes, not all intelligence leads to money.
Some people are emotionally intelligent.
Some are creative.
Some are very practical and good at solving real-life problems.
And many of those skills are not always rewarded financially, which means money is not a complete measure of intelligence.
Exactly. It shows one type of success, but not the whole picture. And when society keeps repeating the same message, it starts affecting how people see themselves.
Yes, this is where things become very personal.
Because even if someone disagrees with the idea, they can still feel influenced by it.
It's like knowing something is not true, but still feeling its effect. For example, someone might know that money does not define their worth.
But still feel less confident when they are not earning as much as others.
Exactly. That feeling can appear without permission.
And it can stay for a long time. This is how external ideas become internal beliefs.
Yes, they move from society into the individual,
And once that happens, they start shaping self-perception.
meaning the way a person sees themselves. If someone believes that money equals success, they may start judging themselves based on their income.
Even if they are hardworking, kind, and capable in many other ways.
Those qualities may start to feel less important.
Because they are not visible in the same way as money, and visibility plays a big role here.
Yes, money is easy to show,
But effort, patience, and growth are often invisible.
which makes them easier to ignore. I think this is especially difficult for people who are working hard but not seeing quick results.
Yes, because their effort is real, but it is not always recognized.
And that can create frustration.
Or even self-doubt. Someone might start thinking that they are not capable enough, even when they are doing their best.
Because they're comparing visible results, not the full journey.
And that comparison is not fair.
There are many people who contribute a lot to the world, but are not financially rewarded in the same way.
Yes, like teachers, caregivers, and people who support others quietly,
Their work is essential, but it is not always valued in terms of money.
which can make them feel overlooked. And sometimes society even looks down on people who earn less,
Yes, which is a very unfair way of thinking.
because income does not reflect a person's dignity or importance.
But the assumption still exists. And those assumptions can appear in small ways.
Like tone of voice, or the way people react when they hear about someone's job.
Or the level of respect they show.
Yes, and those small moments can have a strong impact. When someone feels undervalued, it affects their confidence,
And over time, that feeling can become part of how they see themselves.
even if it isn't true.
So we can see that money does not just affect lifestyle.
It also affects perception, both from others and from ourselves.
And that influence can be very deep.
The important thing is to recognize that these ideas are learned,
Yes, they are not natural truths.
which means they can be questioned.
And possibly changed.
Because once we become aware of how these beliefs are formed, we can start separating money from identity.
And that separation is very important.
It allows us to see ourselves more clearly.
without reducing everything to numbers,
And when we do that, we start noticing things that are often ignored.
like personal growth, effort, and resilience.
Qualities that are not always visible, but still very valuable.
It reminds us that life cannot be measured by one single factor,
Yes, because human value is much more complex than that.
and understanding that complexity can change the way we think about money. When you start looking at money this way, it becomes clear that the problem is not money itself, but the meaning we attach to it.
Yes, and that meaning is often shaped by what we see around us, not by what is actually true.
So if we want a healthier relationship with money, we need to look at that meaning more carefully.
Exactly, because once we question those ideas, we can start building a more balanced view. Money is important, of course. It gives us stability and allows us to make choices in life.
Yes, it can create comfort and reduce certain types of stress.
But when it becomes the main way we measure everything, it starts limiting how we see ourselves and others.
And that limitation can be very subtle. For example, someone might think they are not successful just because they have not reached a certain financial level,
Even if they have grown in many other ways.
even if they have built meaningful relationships, learned new skills, or overcome difficult situations.
Those things matter deeply, but they are not always visible. And because they are not visible, they are often not recognized in the same way as money.
Which creates an imbalance in how we define success.
Yes, we end up valuing what we can easily see instead of what truly shapes a person's life.
I think this is where we need to slow down and ask better questions.
Not just how much do I earn, but also what kind of life am I building?
And what actually matters to me.
Because those answers can be very different for each person.
Some people value freedom more than status.
Some value peace more than competition.
Some value time more than money.
And all of those choices are valid. When we define success only through money, we ignore those differences,
And we start chasing goals that may not even belong to us.
which can lead to a strange feeling of emptiness.
Yes, achieving something that looks good but doesn't feel right. Have you ever noticed that some people seem successful from the outside but still feel unsatisfied?
Yes, and I think that happens when success is based only on external measures.
Because external success does not always match internal fulfillment.
Exactly. At the same time, there are people who live simple lives but feel deeply content
Because their definition of success is more personal.
and more connected to what truly matters to them.
This shows us that money is just one part of the story.
Yes, an important part, but not the whole story.
And when we treat it as the whole story, we miss many important aspects of life.
We miss quiet achievements.
We miss personal growth.
We miss emotional strength.
And we miss the small moments that actually make life meaningful. So maybe the goal is not to remove money from our lives, but to put it in the right place.
Yes, to see it as a tool that supports life, not something that defines it.
And to remember that value cannot be fully measured in numbers.
Because people are much more complex than that.
Much more complex.
Everyone has a story that cannot be seen from the outside.
And that story includes effort, struggle, growth, and experiences that money cannot fully represent.
So if you ever feel like you are behind just because of money, it might help to pause and look at the bigger picture.
Yes, to remind yourself that progress is not always visible.
And that value is not always measurable.
Sometimes the most important changes happen quietly.
And those changes still matter, even if no one else can see them.
This kind of awareness can slowly change how we experience money.
Instead of feeling controlled by it, we start using it more consciously.
And that shift can bring a sense of balance.
Because in the end, money is part of life, but it is not the definition of life.
Yes, and understanding that difference can make a big impact. All right, before we wrap up, we'd really like to hear your thoughts.
Yes, this is a topic that feels different for everyone, so your perspective matters.
Do you feel that money has too much influence in how people judge success? Or do you think it plays a necessary role in defining it?
You can keep your answer simple or share a bit of your own experience.
We always enjoy reading what you think.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might find it meaningful.
It really helps the channel grow and reach more people learning English in a calm and natural way.
Take care of your English.
And take care of your mind. This is Jake.
And this is Sophia.
See you next time.